Welcome to News9 and you are watching On Point with me. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken to President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. Prime Minister Modi conveyed his condolences at the loss of lives at the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza. Shared our deepest concern at the terrorism, violence and deteriorating security situation in the region. He said that India would continue to send humanitarian assistance to the people of Palestine. Prime Minister Modi also reiterated India's principled position on the Israel-Palestine issue. On this, I am joined by my executive editor. Before I introduce other people, I'll take a quick reaction from Aditya Rajkal. Aditya, how do we see this conversation of India's Prime Minister with Mahmoud Abbas?
I think, Karthikeya, this is a stated fact. India's position has been very much consistent, no matter what happens in the Middle East. It's a principled position. It's a position that actually supports the two-nation formula. It supports the formation of the Palestinian state. India has already recognized it many years ago. And Prime Minister speaking to Mahmoud Abbas, the President of the Palestinian Authority, and reiterating the support for the Palestinian cause, but at the same time condemning terrorism. That is, of course, without being said, led by the Hamas terrorists in Gaza. I had interviewed Mahmoud Abbas back in 2015, and he had reflected his deep appreciation for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and at that particular time President Pranab Mukherjee. So I think there's a deep sense of closeness that India has both with Israel and Palestine. If you actually walk on the streets, you'll actually feel the pulse and this warmth that the common people both in West Bank and in Israel, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv have for India. And I think Mahmoud Abbas, even though I personally feel that he is a toothless tiger, he doesn't have much power, but at the same time Mahmoud Abbas realizes the kind of humanitarian aid, the educational support and assistance that India has given for years together.
Aditya, coming to the basic topic, because today we are going to decode the Hezbollah. Today we are going to talk about, has this brought a realignment of the Shia and Sunni militant forces in West Asia? Because in 2011, Hamas didn't support Hezbollah when they were fighting for Bashar Assad. But then now Hezbollah is firing rockets in support of Hamas. Do you think that Indian Prime Minister is aware of a sort of a Shia-Sunni realignment which was not there? In fact, the West Asian politics was divided over that. At one side you had Riyadh and on the other side you had Tehran.
I think this is enemy of enemy, coming closer together and increasingly realizing that if they actually come together, they are mightier and do not have the divisions that actually are spoken about world over, the Shia-Sunni conflict. And if the Shias and Sunnis, if the Hezbollah and Hamas actually come together with the backing of Iran and a few states in the region, I'm not saying that they will be able to defeat Israel, but they will be able to build global opinion, the opinion of the Arab world and the Muslim world in their favor, and perhaps cause more damage that is already visible through the terror attack that happened on the 7th of October.
Okay, now let me get you some details, because when we talk about the Arab unity, is Arab unity a chimera or is it a reality? I'll take you through the details. I'll introduce you what Hezbollah is. I'll tell you a little bit about history. I'll tell you a little bit about what these organizations are. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hezbollah came into existence in 1982. Hamas has been inspired by Muslim Brotherhood, which is one of the oldest Islamic insurgency. It is a Shiite resistance movement. It fought in southern Lebanon. It has attacked Jews all over the world. Hezbollah is inspired and funded by Iran. That's an open secret. I think many people in India would know. And Hezbollah fighters, when I was in Syria, you had photographs of Qasem Soleimani and the leaders of the Hezbollah in cities like Palmyra and Aleppo. And it's not surprising that they would even be there today. It has close ties with IRGC. It gets a free run in Lebanon. It's like a state within state, which Aditya once told me. It's like a mini state within the state. And Hezbollah is led by Hassan Nasrallah. He took over in 1992, and Hezbollah has 30,000 fighters under its wing. So substantial number, and it has got capacity which is global in nature. 30,000 fighters under its wing. It has got 1,50,000 missiles in its possession, which is 150,000 missiles. Now, that is why Israel has taken a precaution and cleared villages on the northern border. So, when we talk about northern two-front war, this is the reason of the two-front war. Hezbollah has attacked Israelis abroad. So, it's not as if their terrorism is limited in a particular region. Let me give you an example. One example, there can be hundreds, but I have chosen this. 1994 car bombing in Argentina killed 85 Jews. 85. Now, the bigger question which I'll take, take it to my guests, which is about what West Asia is. People think that West Asia is only about Western colonial powers. Most of the problem in West Asia emanate from West Asia. It's because the Shia and Sunni states, autocratic in nature, don't speak to each other. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iran on the same page over Gaza for the first time. This is very, very surprising. And you had the success of South Asian Quad and Abraham Accord. So is this happening? One, will it lead to Arab unity, or Arab unity is just a chimera? Die in next 6 months because you have a lot of ethnic issues. And can this end Iranian isolation? Because ultimately, Tehran was sidelined. So, it is also having an impact on the geopolitics. So, these are the questions. These are the questions we are going to raise today. And I am very happy to inform you that I am joined by Colonel Miri Isin, Director, International Institute for Counterterrorism, Reichman University. Lev Aran, Israeli columnist, journalist, former coordinator, India-Israel Parliamentary Friendship League. Tammy Benaim, Counsel General of Israel to South India. And Major General Jagatbir Singh, Distinguished Fellow, USI and Defense, and a noted defense expert. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me on this show. But I'll first go to Colonel Miri Isin. Am I correct to say that it's very surprising that two terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, one is a Shiite militancy, another is a Sunni militancy inspired by Muslim Brotherhood, and something which opposed them in 2011 during Velvet Revolution and didn't send fighters to Syria, has started to collaborate. Is this a new paradigm?
It's not a new paradigm, and in that sense, it's something that we've been following for several years. Over the last year, 2, 3, Hezbollah has come out as the resistance voice for Palestine, and I really liked your presentation of Hezbollah as you did it before. If I'm allowed, just as an Israeli, to say, they're not a militant organization, they are a terror army. And when we talk about Hamas, Hezbollah has 10 times the capabilities. Hamas has many of its leaders who are outside of both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and some of them sit in Lebanon. We have seen over the last few months all sorts of meetings between the heads of Hamas, Sunni, Ismail Haniyeh, Salah al-Aruri. These are different names that we have seen in Lebanon. We've seen also the leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad Nahaleh, all of them in Beirut, talking with Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, but not only with Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah, also with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, with the commander of the Al-Quds forces, with Ismail Kahani, and all of them have been on board and meeting in the last few months. So this is something that's in the background. We're very aware of it. Do they all agree on everything? Is this unification on everything? Not at all. But it is very worrisome when it comes to two terrorist organizations, one in the Gaza Strip, the other in Lebanon, both based on the local population. The Hamas is a Palestinian terrorist organization. Hezbollah is a Lebanese terrorist organization, and their cooperation and even collaboration has a lot of threatening aspects for Israel and the world.
How does Israel intends to deal with these two terrorist forces? One has a number which is roughly around 35,000. Hamas has a build-up from 10,000 from 1990, which has now 40,000 or 35,000 under its military wing, with rockets which have grown from the range of 45 kilometers in 1990 and 2021, which had a range of 65 kilometers, to now that were deployed had a range of 250 kilometers.
One of the things I like is how much you describe in such a wonderful way all of their capabilities. And I'm sitting here in the Tel Aviv area, and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, it's not a question that we have enormous force. We have strong forces with the capacity to both attack and try to, as much as possible, demolish Hamas's terror capabilities. This is not about the Palestinian people, as you said before, with Prime Minister Modi and what he was talking about with the Palestinians. This is about destroying the Hamas terror capability. Hezbollah's is more challenging. Why is it more challenging? Because Hezbollah has had a free supply route from Iran through Iraq, through Syria. They have been hand in hand with the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, so that the quantities and also, I would say, the qualities of their amassed weapons can vastly outnumber and outperform the Hamas ones. We have our forces. We have mobilized the commitment both of the IDF, of our reserve service, and we have at this stage, and it's important, both the commitment and the actual on the ground additional forces of other countries, like the United States, today the United Kingdom's prime minister is in Israel, the day before yesterday the German chancellor was there. All of these understand the threat of Hezbollah with Iran behind them, and yes, we can face all of this terror organization together.
Yes, that Iran can. Let me go across to Tammy Benhaim. When we talk about Palestinian people, do you feel that somehow, because of this realignment which has taken place in West Asia, there is a confusion between Hamas, a terrorist organization inspired by Muslim Brotherhood, Hezbollah, funded by Quds forces and IRGC and supported by Tehran, and Palestinian interest?
One, again, let me just join what Colonel Miri said, and you've described what Hezbollah has in their capabilities very well, and how dangerous and motivated they are. But again, the Iranian regime is funding Hezbollah, helping arm them, get weapons and training. They're funding Hamas with the same things, also training them with weapons, and they're also funding the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is the core, the connection between all three of them. They have one aim: to destroy Israel. And as you yourself said, kill Jews and Israelis, not just in Israel, but around the world. Their greatest funder, the motivator behind them, the body that's working, is the Iranian regime. So there's no realignment in the Middle East or in West Asia. It's these three forces who, for the past few years, and you both said it very well, have been working together with the aim of, killing Israelis, of causing damage to Israel.
Okay, and Tammy, how do you see the call which the Indian Prime Minister had with the Palestinian president? In which context Israel would see that?
By the way, and Aditya also as well said it, India, one of the great strengths of India as a regional power, as a local power, is its ability to speak to many, many players in the international arena and in the world, in the field. Now with the Abraham Accords, there are many projects going on with India, Israel, UAE, US. There are many things happening, and this is one of India's strengths. The fact that it has the hyphenated relationship, the fact that it can talk to both sides. That put aside, obviously everybody cares about Palestinian lives. At least we do, you do. Other people do. Terrorist organizations do not, like Hamas. But talking with President Mahmoud Abbas is important, and it's good that India is speaking to them, but it has nothing to do with what Hamas is now doing in the Gaza Strip. They're not, Fatah and the Hamas terror organization, they don't talk to each other. One of the ways that Hamas gained control of Gaza was to throw Fatah ministers and ministers that supported Mahmoud Abbas off roofs. Throw their supporter off roofs, kill them in order to gain control of the Gaza Strip. There's no connection right now with what the Hamas terror organization is doing. And as you yourself said, also Hezbollah is firing rockets into Israel. And just to be very clear, while I was waiting to get online, sirens have been sounding in the southern part of Israel, in Tel Aviv, central Israel, and in the north from rockets still being fired at us. So there's no connection between what this terror organization is doing with the rockets, with the kidnapped civilians that they took and they're torturing, has nothing to do with Palestinian liberation, with the Palestinian Authority, or with the Palestinian people, actually.
Tammy, I know it's a question in retrospect, but I think it needs to be asked. Do you feel that the position which the Jordanians took was disappointing? Because if you are committed to peace, then you create space for peace. It's like Mahatma Gandhi, worst riots took place in this subcontinent after partition. He went to Noakhali. People criticized him. That was a Muslim quarter. A lot of people said, why are you doing this? He said, because he wants peace. He can be criticized for something. And Jordanians didn't create that space for peace. You can be criticized by your brethren, but the act of creating the space for peace was not done by them. I see it from a very Indian standpoint.
Yesterday, what happened, and I think we're referring to the same thing, when President Biden came to Israel, and by the way, you were speaking about the general support for Israel. We're getting great support from India, from the United States, from European countries, from South American countries, from Africa, because we have to stand united in combating terror. And I'll talk about it in a minute. But yesterday, what happened, President Biden, the first US president ever to come visit Israel at wartime when we're at war, was supposed to also go to Jordan to have a summit. I'm not sure if it was a peace summit, but he was going to discuss with the Egyptian president, with the president of the Palestinian Authority, and of course, with the King of Jordan, issues pertaining to the war that's going on, pertaining to the kidnapped civilians that the Hamas terror organization is going, and the poor population in Gaza that's suffering under this terror organization. They were going to discuss it due to this fake news that came out about Al-Akhli Hospital, that horrible, the tragedy that happened there due to an errant terrorist rocket shot from within almost the hospital grounds themselves and landing there so tragically. Landing there so tragically, and the rocket that was aimed at Israeli civilians ended up horribly killing Palestinian civilians in Gaza. So, things weren't clear in the beginning, and they decided not to hold the summit. Now, I don't know what happened after. My assumption is, and you know more than me, and I'm sure Aditya has a lot of diplomatic background. That doesn't mean that President Biden did not speak to the regional leaders. It doesn't mean that there was no interaction. The summit, due to what happened afterwards, we figured out the story isn't true, and it's again Hamas and the terror groups trying to use things for their advantage against Israel. But, we're not saying talks are going on. Israel today also agreed to let in medicine and water and food for the Palestinian population, because Hamas is not taking care of them. And we, reinstated the water supply from Israel because Hamas is using the fuel. Instead of fueling their desalination stations, they're
Tammy,
using
what's
it
the
as
funny
rockets,
part
and
from
we
an
saw
Indian
it.
perspective? What's the funny part? And I'll take this question to Colonel Miri. The funny part is, 5 people fighting each other from last 25 to 30 years have turned out to be the best friends. Tehran and Iran and Saudi Arabia have been fighting and killing innocent people in Yemen. The Houthi rebels, they have turned best friends. Jordanians have immensely benefited from the Israeli relationship, and suddenly, they take a step back. They do not participate in creating the condition for some sort of a talk. And Egyptians who have also benefited from Israel, and the way Sinai Peninsula, it's part of history. Israel gave it away for reconciliation, does not reciprocate unless and until there is pressure. So two questions. Do you feel that this is a realignment? And second, isn't it a hypocritical nature that you have been fighting everywhere with each other, and suddenly you are the best friends there?
So I don't think that Saudi Arabia and Iran are best friends. I think that Saudi Arabia is the most alarmed by everything going on right now. Saudi Arabia does not share a land border with Iran. They do share in that sense the Persian Gulf, one side of which is Saudi Arabia, and the other side you have the Iranian large Persian country. And it's both the Sunni and the Shiite, and that's been going on forever. I think the different countries have different interests, but the Hamas terror assault on Israel as it took place is the biggest fear of every one of the Sunni governments around. That includes Jordan, that includes Saudi Arabia, that includes the Emirates, that includes Egypt. Egypt, I remind you, has one of the only countries in this area that defines Hamas as a terror organization, that sees Hamas as a threat against them. So I'm going to separate between the rhetoric, talking to their people. Hamas are inciting through social media, through open media, a completely a lying version of what they have done and are doing against Israel. And as such, the leaders, if it's in Egypt, if it's in Saudi Arabia, if it's in Jordan, have to do a very careful walk with their own people who are hearing the worst things that are totally unreal, and between understanding their own continuation as the leaders of these countries. So this is not a honeymoon for Saudi Arabia and Iran. This is the survival of these different countries, trying to say things to calm down their own people inside. Remember, they're not democracies like the amazing country India. They're not democracies like Israel or the United States. They are all autocratic regimes. They have a lot of challenges inside, and that street can become a mob, can become something very, very extreme. So I don't see this being a new Middle East in that sense. It's, as said before so eloquently, this is the old Middle East. This is Hamas, the terror organization, with Hezbollah, the terror organization, with Iran, the big state sponsor of terrorism, not just in the Middle East, but around the world.
And before I let go of you, isn't Israel perturbed by the Russian silence? 15% of Israelis speaks Russian, if my data is correct. There were pogroms in Russia. The Jews had to flee that part of the Europe, Eastern Europe, and Putin has been silent.
So dare I, on this amazing program in India, I don't know if it's followed in Russia, be the one who says, yeah, Vladimir Putin, we're talking Russia against Ukraine. We're talking about Russia coming out in full support of Hamas, the terror organization. Am I going to say something about being disappointed? Maybe I won't say that I'm surprised, but here we are. That is part of that new realignment, and that makes it so much more important on how very clearly India and India's leadership has stood up and clearly said, Hamas is hardcore terror, and it's not about the Palestinian people.
Okay, wonderful. I'm also joined by Major General Jagatbir Singh. Thank you very much for joining me on my show. So my question, I'll come to you directly, is, so what is the biggest challenge? You have Hezbollah 40,000, you have Hamas, which is 35,000, you have Gaza metro, tunnels, a sort of an asymmetric warfare. Does it increase the challenge of the Israeli state in dealing with two terrorist forces, one in north and another in south, different in ideology, one a Shia terrorist organization and another being Sunni?
Absolutely, very well brought out. Their challenges abound, and more that you look at it, they keep increasing. There are three challenges at the moment. The first challenge is, how do you deal with terror organization, that is Hamas? The second challenge for them at the moment is how you deal with that terror organization without alienating the population of Palestinians who reside in Gaza Strip. The third challenge is, how do you prevent the West Bank from joining the conflict? And how do you deal with the Palestinian Authority? And the third challenge, what you talked about, is how do you prevent Hezbollah from coming in and from expanding the conflict? So these are the challenges which are facing Israel at the moment, and they're being pulled in multi-directions. Now, to put it very fairly and very squarely, this conflict can be looked at from two sides. And one is based on the current episode, and the other is based on a continuum of events that have taken place over the past 75 years ago. That is right from 1948. So you had wars of 48, you had wars of 67, you had 73. You've talked about the Intifada in Lebanon, where the Israelis were against the PLO at that time, and Al-Fatah was his organization of Yasser Arafat. And then they were also challenged by the Hezbollah, and how later on the PLO and the Hezbollah fell apart. So these things, what are being talked about, yes, they are
Okay.
challenges. Ultimately, Israel had to pull out of Palestine, of Lebanon. So
So,
Lebanon is still burning. So these are the terror organizations they have to deal with. And like you said, some are supported by Iran. Now, Iran is the main funder of, as far as the Hezbollah is concerned. You talked of,
and sir,
Hezbollah
Mr.
has
Singh,
far
we have
greater
not
arsenal.
even, Mr. Singh, we have not even accounted for the enhanced capability of Hezbollah, because what we have witnessed is an enhanced capability of Hamas. Because what we came to know on the first day is that they were able to jam the cellular network of the Israelis. They were able to jam their communication link. They were able to use sophisticated technology to make themselves invisible. I am also joined by Lev Aran, Israeli columnist and journalist from Israel. He is part of the Israeli Parliamentary Friendship League. My question to you is very straight and simple. Every country has a right to respond to terrorism. I think, wasn't it a bit rich on the part of United States of America to tell Israel, don't do what we did in 9/11? They went and invaded an entire country, and they are asking Israel to show restraint when they are dealing with terrorist organization. Wasn't it that bit rich on part of President Biden?
So I think the simple answer is that this is exactly what the Americans are saying privately to Netanyahu. They tell him, when we go open to the press, we give full support. Also, Prime Minister Sunak from the UK is doing the same. But privately, they tell him, we made a mistake in Iraq, and we don't want you to repeat the same mistake. We want to see a plan, not only to see how you invade Gaza and go out of here and then it will be chaotic there. We want to understand what is your big plan about Gaza. And if you don't have a big plan about Gaza, don't try to occupy all of Gaza, because then you will have the same fate as we had in Iraq and maybe even in Afghanistan. So I think this is what privately Biden tells Netanyahu. He doesn't try to protect what the Americans did. He just wants to tell Bibi, don't do the mistakes that we did.
Tammy, this question is to you. Americans dropped mother of all bombs in Afghanistan. They invaded Iraq and there was no chemical weapon in Iraq. Even the Vietnam War, the dossiers were all fake for the American public. They kept on telling them that they're winning the war where they were losing it. Isn't it a bit rich? I'm repeating this question on part of the Americans to tell the Israelis not to respond to terror when they went and invaded the entire countries. And Israel has not even entered Gaza. One tank has not entered Gaza. And they are telling them to exercise restraint, whereas within 72 hours, their forces were in Mazar-e-Sharif. And it's part of the history, the declassified dossiers of CIA. They took no opinion. They didn't create collaboration. They were there with unilateral action. Isn't that unfair?
I want to tell you that Israel, we've suffered many attacks from Hamas. This is not the first attack from this terrorist organization. It's one of the most heinous, worst ones. They've killed 1,400 people so far, injured 3,800, have taken 203, babies, children, young women, the elderly. They took them, kidnapped them, and took them hostage to Gaza. So it's definitely painful. And Israel has always, in prior terror attacks and prior rocket shootings into Israel, we've always tried to use restraint. We've always aimed ourselves at Hamas infrastructure, at Hamas rocket launchers, at Hamas weapon storage, because Israel, the country, and our IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, are doing what they can, as opposed to Hamas, their organization that controls Gaza. We care about the population. We're not we try to affect the infrastructure, and we've always used restraints. And even now, we're targeting only Hamas infrastructure. The war we declared is on Hamas. But we must ensure a few things. The first one is that safety and security returns to Israel. And as I said just a few minutes ago, rockets are being fired as we're speaking here. Rockets are being fired into Israel. So we must first and foremost make sure that we're back to being safe and secure. We must free these kidnapped people, these kidnapped civilians that are, taken by Hamas terror into Gaza. And we must ensure that Hamas doesn't have the capabilities to, or the ability to strike again,
Tammy,
like it did on
after
Saturday.
After Israeli forces left the southern Lebanon after the wars, you have been able to degrade the forces of Hamas, engage with them, but nothing of that sort could have happened because of a different territory when it comes to Hezbollah. How concerning is that?
I think Colonel Miri also referred to it. Look, we'll deal with whatever comes. We're ready, we're strong. We have the army, we have the reservists, we have a whole nation, working together, united, helping in whatever way they can to try to, as I said, complete the 3 goals I just mentioned, but make sure, that our country is safe again and we can go on with our normal, regular lives. So we'll deal with what comes, but you're right, their capabilities are astounding. I like Colonel Miri called them a terror army. It's not even an organization. Some armies are not as armed as well as Hezbollah is. And we see now with Hamas, despite the fact that we're targeting their infrastructure, despite the fact that they've already launched close to 7,400 rockets at Israel these past days, they still have enough weapon storage. They still have enough launchers to continue striking. So we definitely must make sure to destroy their capabilities, to make sure that they can't do this again. And this is why, and I saw one of your headlines, but this is why it's so important for us that countries, like-minded countries like India, like the US, and Prime Minister Sunak was in Israel today, Britain, France, Germany, as I said, South American countries are standing behind us and sending this very clear message to terror organizations. Because we have these terror organizations right on our border, and we're fighting right now for our existence, for our security. But these terror organizations are everywhere, and they'll strike everywhere. And many of the countries that I've mentioned have suffered terrible terror attacks before. So we know if we're not sending a clear message that this will not be condoned, this will not be, we'll stop it. When we'll stop it, it might harm definitely Israel, but other countries as well.
And to our viewers, both Hamas and Hezbollah, they are not geolocated terrorist organizations, they are transnational organizations. I have personally seen Hezbollah fighters manning road from Homs to Palmyra, which means that Hezbollah, a Lebanese force, was operating in Syria, which is a different country. So understand the sort of help Hezbollah, the terrorist group, received. And Hamas has received help from other branches. Their leadership is in different parts of West Asia. So it's not as if they're located in Gaza City or or Hezbollah is located in Beirut. You could find their imprints throughout West Asia, which has its own different patronage, different financial links. But before that, we have a small package on Hezbollah. Let me play that package for you first.
Lebanon's militant group Hezbollah has been exchanging fire with Israel across the border for days, threatening to expand a conflict between Israel and Palestinian group Hamas. But what is Hezbollah? Iran's Revolutionary Guards founded Hezbollah in 1982 in the middle of Lebanon's civil war. It was part of Iran's effort to export its Islamic revolution around the region and fight Israeli forces after their invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Hezbollah shares Tehran's Shiite Islamist ideology and went on to recruit Lebanese Shiite Muslims. The group has risen from a shadowy faction to a heavily armed force with major sway over the Lebanese state. It has ministers in government and lawmakers in parliament. Western countries, including the United States, designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. The US holds the group responsible for a suicide bombing that destroyed US Marine headquarters in Beirut in 1983, killing 241 servicemen. And Lebanese security officials and Western intelligence have said groups linked to Hezbollah carried out suicide attacks on Western embassies and kidnapped Westerners in the 1980s. Hezbollah leaders said those attacks were carried out by small groups not linked to Hezbollah. In 2021, Hezbollah leader Saeed Hassan Nasrallah said the group had 100,000 fighters. Iran gives Hezbollah weapons and money. The US estimates Iran has allocated it hundreds of millions of dollars annually in recent years. Hezbollah boasts weapons including precision rockets and drones. It demonstrated its military advances in 2006 during a 5-week war with Israel. It fired thousands of rockets into Israel during the conflict. 1,200 people were killed in Lebanon, mostly civilians, and more than 150 Israeli were killed, most of them soldiers. Many Lebanese Shiites support Hezbollah, saying the group defends Lebanon from Israel. However, Lebanese parties opposed to Hezbollah say the group unilaterally drags Lebanon into armed conflict. Hezbollah has deep ties to Hamas, another Palestinian faction backed by Iran. On October 7th, the day Hamas militants carried out an unprecedented assault into Israel, Hezbollah said it was in direct contact with the leadership of the Palestinian resistance. Since then, Hezbollah has exchanged cross-border fire with Israel numerous times.
Lev, do you think that the presence of the two strike carriers in Mediterranean, Gerald Ford and Eisenhower, will be enough a deterrent from Hezbollah or the Lebanese forces or Syrians or the Quds forces for trying any adventurous mission on the northern borders?
I think the main role is against Iran, not even against Hezbollah. The main role is to say the assumption is that Israel can win both Hezbollah and Hamas, even in a true front war. Israel prefers one front war against Hamas, which is, as you said before, 10 times weaker than Hezbollah. But even if Hezbollah is part of the war, still I don't think that even Hezbollah and Hamas together have a real chance to win Israel in a direct war. The only player that is really dangerous for Israel is Iran. And I think the reason that the Americans brought such big forces to the Mediterranean is to say to the Iranians, if you are part of it, we are also part of it. So I hope, and meanwhile it looks like what Hezbollah is showing is more like rhetorics and symbolic actions than a real war with Hamas. But even if Hezbollah decides that it wants a full-fledged war against Israel, I think the American forces are more against Iran than against Hezbollah.
General, do you concur with this point of view that this is more against Iran and less to do with these two terrorist organizations? It's like the Gerald Ford and Eisenhower, two strike carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, so that other countries don't become adventurous?
Absolutely, because what is the background is that Israel is a hard part. Now it has to demonstrate itself when it attacks the Hamas. And to do that, they need deterrence. And the deterrence comes in the form of allies such as US and UK backing them openly by sending their aircraft carriers to that region. Second thing is they have to be very strong against the northern borders or southern Lebanon against Hezbollah to prevent Hezbollah being drawn into the conflict. So they have to say that they will retaliate in force. But unfortunately, this force has to be directed not against the civilians. The force has to be directed. Like in India, we had a similar issue, and we carried out surgical strikes targeting terrorists and the terrorist camps. And there was no fallout or collateral damage to the extent you're seeing. Unfortunately, in wars, all this often happens. I was posted in Iraq during the period immediately after the Gulf War, and I happened to visit a bomb shelter over there, where at that time also women and children were targeted, but that they said was fired deliberately over there, but they felt it was housing Saddam Hussein's headquarters. So these things happen like it happened in the hospital. But the major issue of the hospital tragedy, which is yet not been answered, is can it be a weapon fired by the Hamas, which was a misfire, which caused such extensive damage? That is the question that needs to be asked, because all the rockets that have been fired at Israel have not had that damaging effect as we've seen one misfire having in the hospital. So that's the biggest doubt everybody has. And I feel that in a case like this, unless you have an independent group under the UN going in to investigate who raised it, you'll have disinformation by both
But
sides.
General Singh, I think the biggest fear is asymmetrical warfare, because ultimately when you go, if it, in infantry, if it has to go down the wire, it means men in the tunnels, which are
Absolutely.
1,300 tunnels, sir, 500-kilometer long, and they can carry cargo.
This is the biggest challenge for conventional forces when they face a terrorist organization which indulges in asymmetrical warfare. Absolutely well brought out. How do you flush the people out from the tunnels? Ultimately, the people in the tunnels will be killed in some manner, and for that there will be no blame on the others. But the unfortunate thing is when civilians are targeted, you have the issue of public opinion going against you. Now, Israel has been targeted by a horrible, horrible, horrible terrorist attack on 7th October. And people are, comparing it to what happened during the Holocaust. And it was unbelievable, the barbarity that was unleashed on these innocent people. So there's no denying that. But to maintain the public pressure on your side, you have to ensure that this does not spill over and cause certain damage to innocents, which will then affect you. And I think that's something which everybody will understand, everybody who's fighting this. If you know, the Israeli forces have yet not entered Gaza. They are still outside, they're pounding Gaza with rockets and artillery. When they enter Gaza, it will be a different ball game altogether. It's very, very difficult.
Okay, and Tammy, isn't it true that there's a larger geopolitics at play? As I said, that the Putin hasn't said anything, despite the fact that 15% Israelis speak Russian. The Chinese have not come out. They gave a very banal statement that it's not an existential threat. Do you feel that this larger arc of politics is having a repercussion in Israel, where Israel standing alone against terrorist forces like Hamas and Hezbollah?
We're not standing alone in the least bit. As we've mentioned, I'll mention the countries again. India and Prime Minister Modi came out very, very clearly against terrorism and Israel's rights to defend itself. And last week, the two prime ministers had another update discussion. The United States has stood unequivocally with us. President Biden came during wartime to Israel. As you know, they have the fleets in our area. So did Germany. So did France. So did the UK. Prime Minister is now still in Israel today. So there's we're not alone. The message is very clear. The terrorist organization will be defeated. It will not be able to strike again against Israel. And this is what we have to ensure. It's very, very clear.
And Tammy, this is something which every Indian would like to ask. No, because we are victims of terror. We have undergone 26/11. We have seen small attacks which the world has said ignore. When someone tells you the burden of peace lies on you because you are bigger and stronger, how does that feel? I have grown up in Delhi, which had seen violence because one neighboring state was trying to instigate a very prosperous community, and it created a lot of violence in 80s, and then the 90s, then there was Islamic terrorism, and the burden of peace was on India. How does Israel feel that when it is not an aggressor and it has to face these terrorists, but the burden of peace is on the one who is getting hit by the terrorist? I want to ask this from you at a very personal level. How do you feel? I used to be exasperated as an individual before I became a journalist.
One, if we're talking personal level,
Yes.
I have a very love for India, like many Israelis do. So we do appreciate the support we're getting from almost everyone in India, from the government to people to position holders. And sadly, regrettably, I lived in Delhi as well for a few years. And in 2008 November, I was there during the horrible attacks on
There was an attack on
Mumbai
the
and Chabad
Israeli
House.
bureaucrats. Attempted attack on the Israeli bureaucrats in India.
Yeah, those were we had later. It's later, but in 2008, a Jewish center in Mumbai was attacked as well, and Jewish hostages were Jewish people who were held hostage by the terrorists were killed, and it's a horrible. So it stayed obviously in my heart, and it's one of the things that impact my life, talking on a personal level. But this is why you can understand this. Israel has always said that it will make peace with anybody who's willing to make peace. And we've proved it again and again. After the Yom Kippur War, which was a surprise attack on us as well and devastating for us, we made peace with Egypt in 79. We made peace with Jordan in 94. We went to the Oslo Accords just 3 years ago. We had the Abraham Accords signed with UAE, Bahrain. Morocco also joined. We're in talks now in contact with Saudi Arabia. And obviously during wartime, Israel cannot deal now with continuing negotiations because we have more pressing matters in mind. And of course, the U.S. is also, dealing with other issues. But it's not correct to say that there has been anything official. So basically what I'm trying to say, Israel, and as I said, the Oslo Accords, but we've been having negotiations with the Palestinian Authority for many years. But it's a whole different issue now. And hopefully we'll get back one day to talking directly to the Palestinian Authority and finding a solution for the issue that has been going on too long. But this terror attack, how do you make, I've been hearing it a lot, and India didn't negotiate with the terrorists. The U.S. didn't negotiate with the terrorists. Europe isn't negotiating with terrorists. You don't really make peace with terrorists. You have to make sure that the Hamas is destroyed, that the Hamas does not have the capabilities to remain a terrorist organization in the area. And then we have to, and you're right, and the international community also needs to figure out what to do with Gaza. But it's not right now. The first and main issue is to stop this terrorist organization, to stop them from shooting rockets, to free the kidnapped people that they've taken. And they haven't freed. They haven't made any sign. They won't even speak to the Red Cross. So Israel, we didn't start this war. This surprised us. And this attack is still going on since October 7. It's still going on right now.
Tammy, Indians know that.
You're right. Sorry.
Indians know that the burden of peace cannot be with Israel. The burden of peace has to be with those who are instigating these terrorists. It's their responsibility. The burden of peace cannot be with Israel. Israel is the victim of terror.
Yeah, well, no, we're part of a solution. You're right. We're a strong country. We're strong economically. We're strong militarily. We're united amongst ourselves. We're a strong, resilient people. We have to be part of it. But what I'm saying is we always grabbed any chance of peace with both hands. We've always, run forward with any option for peace. And we'll do it again once it's offered. But at the moment, we have to concentrate on our existence, ensuring our existence and bringing safety and security back to everybody in Israel.
No, absolutely. Israel is such a beautiful place. I was there with my wife 2 months ago, and I had taken her to Jerusalem, to Tel Aviv, Bethlehem, and she was saying, I'm a little scared, Karthik, and I said, no, I had covered Prime Minister Modi's visit. I think we can go there, it's safe. So when we were there from Golan Height to other parts, to Jaffa, to Bethlehem, most of it done on the foot. Wow. And I was saying, good, there is no, it's peace, West Bank is peaceful when I went to Bethlehem. And it is so sad that it's such a beautiful country that has been so mercilessly attacked by these Hamas, and Hamas needs to be taught a lesson. And I think it's a reminder to the world that the terror has to be dealt in a way that the terror is terrified. I will leave you with a bite of Rishi Sunak, but Indians understand what terrorism is, and that is why India stands united with the Israelis.
Prime Minister, thank you for your warm words and for welcoming me to Israel. I'm just sorry to be here in such terrible circumstances. In the last 2 weeks, this country has gone through something that no country, no people should have to endure, least of all Israel, which has lived through some of the most awful scenes, the spectre of violence and terrorism every day of its existence. And I want to share the deep condolences of the British people and stress that we absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law, to go after Hamas, to take back hostages, deter further incursions, and to strengthen your security for the long term. Now, I know that you are taking every precaution to avoid harming civilians, in direct contrast to the terrorists of Hamas, which seek to put civilians in harm's way. But I also want to thank you for the support that your government has given to the families of British nationals caught up in this horror, including your efforts to release the hostages, secure their release, and I know that we will continue to cooperate, particularly with regard to the British nationals that are involved. Can I also say that we have seen the scenes over the past day that have shocked all of us, particularly at the hospital, and we mourn the loss of every innocent life, civilians of every faith, every nationality who have been killed. And we also recognise that the Palestinian people are victims of Hamas too. And that is why I welcome your decision yesterday that you took to ensure that routes into Gaza will be opened for humanitarian aid to enter. I'm glad that you made that decision. We will support it. We're increasing our aid to the region, and we will look to get more support to people as quickly as we can. The last thing for me to close on is this. You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity. We will stand...
He thought he could outlast us.